For those of you who don't know me, I'm the historian for Oakland County Parks. I have the best job in the world, I always say. Essentially, quickly, my job is the history of these 15 parks. Well, not just these 15, but some of the new ones we're working on, which is really exciting. And not just the park, but the land around the park, because parks don't end at the borders. So essentially, each one of these means a whole bunch of land, including sometimes a whole township around it. So my heart and soul is in Oakland County history. And tonight I want to talk about how I do that in a park and what it means. When you think about visiting a park, most people when they visit a park, what are they trying to do? Well, one of the huge, and we have data on this, is people want to connect with nature. Being in a park is a great place to do that. So my issue then is that I need to connect people with something else. I want them to connect with nature because I work in a park system, but I'm also looking for a way to help them connect with the past, to connect with history. And I think tonight you will see there's some really interesting ways to do that. And the first ones I'm going to talk about actually connect with nature too. So you get the natural features and the cultural historic features of a park. Let me give you an example. Some of the things I want to talk about tonight are fence posts and lilacs and rock piles and apple trees. So be prepared for that. And it's all about how do you find history in our park? And of course, why would you want to do that? Why does history enrich the experience people have in a park? And I won't answer that question. I'm hoping by the time I finish, you will see that would enrich my experience I have in a park. I'm going to start at Orion Oaks. Many of you probably know that as our dog park. Orion Oaks is famous for the wonderful dog park we have there. But there's some wonderful trails in that park. It's a very big park. So it's an easy park where you can connect with nature and not just take your dog. Let me give you some examples. Each of our parks has this map. This is a map showing the natural features of a park. Right here, number 4 happens to be woodland complexes. And there's several of them at Orion Oaks. And think about that. These are places particularly in Orion Oak, beech and maple forest. When you're in a forest, it is easy, I think, to connect with nature. There's something about being in a forest that helps us do that. But we also have over here these numbers. I should say 3, by the way. We have wetland where we have cool plants like sedges and cattails. We can connect with nature here in a different way, but there's something calming about being in a wetland. And hearing the birds of a wetland and seeing the different kinds of plants. And then we have these areas marked as, in fact, our dog park is one of them, an old field. Well, now think about that. I would predict most fields are pretty old, but these are special. These aren't just fields we're calling old fields. These are fields that have been identified as areas of historic field growth. We know these areas have been plowed, they've been planted, they've been touched by humans. So when we say an old field in a park, it's one that we know human beings were working with. Here's an old field. This is one of the old fields at Orion Oaks. And that's cool because once you call it an old field and we tell people farmers were there, it was plowed, you have an instant connection between a natural area and human beings. And then we can go back in time. Take a look at this aerial photo from 1940. And what does this tell us? Wait, I can see the fields here. I can see the way human beings mark off using tree lines where their fields are, big fields, little fields, fields of different kinds of crops. So now Orion Oaks, we're taking a look at human history within where the park system comes. And then we could go back to the 1872 map and we could find out whose fields those were. Now we can attach a human being to a field in a park. And that's where history gets cool. Not just the fields that are there, but whose field was it? Who were, you might see some familiar names here if you know anything about the history of Orion Township. But then we could go looking for this. What about something like this? These are near one of those old fields. We have old foundation now. Now we have another element of human history. So starting with a field, and then now we can look at the fields as they existed 80 years ago, and now we can actually look at a foundation. What was this? Was it a barn? Was it a house? But now we have foundation. And if we're lucky, we might even find an old artifact or two near an old foundation. So starting with just the natural map, looking at an old field, looking back in time, then looking for, wait a minute, can we find old foundation in the area? So the whole point tonight, parks are filled with human history. That machine you're looking at, that's sitting in an old field at Rose Oaks County Park. Well, now, if you look at something like this, Addison Oaks, I think the fact that this is historical is pretty clear. In some of our parks, history is really obvious. This is the Buell Mansion, built in 1927 by Laura and Cora Peck Buell. It's an obvious piece of history. But you don't need a big mansion in a park to find history. I want to find you tonight some other ways. But what you have to do is think and look like a historian. Now, you may look at this field and see, oh, let's see, look at the plants that are there. Oh, those are beautiful flowers. What are those? Are any of these things invasive? So we could look through naturalist eyes. But when I look at this field, I'm seeing cows. I am seeing an old field and I am seeing somebody's cows in that field, and I want to figure out whose cows those were. So by looking through historian eyes, sometimes when you're in a park, you begin to imagine the past. And then I'm going to get out an old map and I'm going to get out an agricultural census because I'm going to figure out using that old map whose field it was, and then I'm going to prove he had cows. I'm going to go to the 1870 census where it will tell me for that farmer how many cows he had in 1870. And then the puzzle pieces of history come together in the history of a park. Now, if you look here, I'll bet you're seeing an old rock pile. Historian eyes are going to see something different. They're going to see, my eyes, imagine a farmer there with that tool called a stone boat, something that was used to gather the stones and rocks in a field and haul them over to make a pile of them out of the way so that a field could be plowed and planted and cultivated. So now, with that in mind, how do we look for evidence of human history? I'm going to start with plants. And I hope you're saying, wait a minute, excuse me. Plants are natural features. What I go looking for are plants that have human connections. I want to start with this one. I want you to think back to late April, early May in Oakland County. And if you saw that this year, it's one of my favorite things. This plant tells me that spring has arrived. This is serviceberry, that beautiful, it's the first thing I always see in spring. And notice it has several different names. Look at the serviceberry and sassacoon and juneberry and shadblow and sugar plum and sarvis. Now, wait a minute. How come people have different names for the same plant? I'm guessing that it might be because they're from different regions of the country and for some reason have evolved a different name. There's something culturally cool about that. This is a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer, one of my favorite authors. She's Citizen Nation Potawatomi. If you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, her beautiful book about botany and indigenous wisdom, the teaching of plants, it's wonderful. And she says, the more names a plant has, the greater its cultural significance and importance because it meant a lot to different people. And that's the connection between a plant, a natural feature, and human history. In fact, at Amazon, you'll find a short little essay that she wrote called The Serviceberry. Well, in that essay, she gives the Potawatomi name for books for a serviceberry, which is Pozakmin. Translation, the best of the berries. We have a lot of berries in Michigan. If the Potawatomi said this is the best of the berries, they must have had a lot of uses for it, and they really did. But many other indigenous groups had similar uses for the serviceberry. And some that I found really fascinating for the Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee were called the Iroquois by the English. Now, for them, they said the blossoms mark the passage of time. And when the Haudenosaunee saw the serviceberry, that was their indicator it was time to plant their corn. So it was marking time. For the Lenape, also the passage of time. But when they saw the blossoms, they knew it was going to be time when the shad began to run up the river to spawn. And it was time to fish for the shad. Wait a minute, remember a couple of those names? Shadbush and Shadblow, coming historically from the Lenape. Now, the Ojibwe, who also saw it as marking time, also, like many groups, found uses for it. In this case, the Ojibwe boiled the bark to make a disinfectant. Well, now, how about non-Indigenous folks as they moved into the area? Again, they recognized the importance of serviceberry. But notice what they saw it as marking time. It was a sign that the ground in the parts of Michigan with a deep freeze had thawed enough for graves to be dug to the proper depth. You know, here in wintertime, when early non-Indigenous settlers did a grave, they did it at least 6 feet deep. You couldn't do that in winter. But they knew when you saw the serviceberry, you could now dig a grave to the proper depth. It also meant for the circuit riders. Those were ministers who traveled to our most remote settlements. And they weren't able to go in the wintertime to the deep wood settlements. But they knew once the serviceberry could be seen, it was time for them to begin their circuit to the most remote settlements again. And of course, non-Indigenous people also said, well, it's edible and we can make pies and jams. So if we think about the serviceberry and how a plant that we all see and enjoy, I think every one of our parks has serviceberry that has human connections. Well, so do lilacs. Now, we're talking about a different kind of plant. Lilacs, unlike serviceberry, are not indigenous to Michigan. Most botanists and historians think that lilacs actually likely were indigenous to first Eastern Europe. And then, as people migrated west, and people migrated different directions, but as they moved westward, what did they do? They took their lilacs with them, ending up in different parts now of Western Europe. Now, why? We take with us when we move what we love. And people love lilacs, the fragrance of lilacs, the beauty of lilacs, and they took them with them. But then what happened with some of those folks in France and in England? Well, they sailed across the Atlantic, forming new colonies, and what did they take with them? They took their lilacs. And then lilacs appear in the colonies. And then what happened? Over time, Some of those people moved westward again, up into places like the Northwest Territory, which Michigan was part of at that time. And what did they take with them? They took their lilacs. And we see now lilacs moving across the planet in this motion of human migration. And that's why we see lilacs planted next to houses and barns in Michigan, in Oakland County in our early years. But not just houses and barns, also outhouses. These were the days before Febreze and Glade, and lilacs were a very wise thing to plant around your outhouse because of their fragrance. And now we have these human connections. So when you see a lilac bush in a field like this, you can bet money that there was human presence there. Likely maybe a foundation nearby, but a farm, a house that was there with a barn. I want to show you now my favorite lilac bush in all of our Oakland County parks. It's the oldest one I've ever seen. I've got to get pictures of it. It's massive. The internal parts of this lilac are beautiful. It's big, and where is it at? It's at Rose Oaks County Park. Here, right here is the lilac bush. And wait a minute, let me take you back in time. 1974. Oh, there it is. Harder to see, but wait a minute. I didn't see this before. This is a house. Oh, here's a little barn. Now we can see the farm of William Fillingham, who will be in Rose Township early on in the 1860s. And Paxo family will own the land into the early 1900s. And so now, besides the lilac bush, now we know whose lilac bush it was. And we can actually look at an aerial and see where his house was located and the barn. But look here. If you look closely, you'll see a little shadow of a little building. I am going to bet money that that was William Fillingham's outhouse over in that direction. And now that might be, I see my mentor, Richard Stamps, with us tonight. Rich, wouldn't that be a wonderful place to do a privy dig? Oh my goodness. So we have plants, but we also want to look at trees. Obviously still plants, but trees have some wonderful connections. I want to start with oak trees. And why? Well, that's who we are. That's how we got our name. Oaks from indigenous times up till now have been hugely important in Oakland County. The oak trees on our flag, for example. We have 5 different kinds of oak trees in Oakland County, and they're all subtly different. You know, one of the magic things about working as a historian with a park system is you have colleagues who are naturalists, who are specialists in natural features. And I've been learning about oak trees. Notice for each of the oak trees, there's slight differences. Here we have, notice with the leaf and the acorn and the bark. Now watch when I flip to the next oak tree. Oh, look at the difference now with the black oak. Subtle differences that, to be honest, I didn't even know existed. But look within the 5 different kinds of oaks, these beautiful subtle differences. Well, now, what about indigenous uses? Indigenous people had multiple uses in terms of food and medicine and technology. Well, think about food. What about acorns? Abundant, storable, nutritional. So acorns as a food crop, that were very common use by indigenous people. Now, what about the non-indigenous settlers that came? Well, I learned that early on, when food was very scarce, there were a few uses by non-indigenous people. How did they know how to cook them? Because you have to be careful. You have to leach acorns because there's a poisonous part. Well, the very earliest folks learned where? From Native Americans. But by and large, among Oakland County early non-indigenous settlers, it wasn't anything that was valued as a food crop. But It was important. And why? Because they learned that if you fed acorns to your pigs, you could fatten them up. So another human connection to oak trees. And then here's one I found that fascinated me. I was finding all these different uses of oak trees. And then I found Carolyn King, who's Anishinaabe. She lives just outside of Toronto. She has a beautiful video about oak tree knowledge and how important oak trees were to the Anishinaabe. And she had a use of oak trees I had never thought of. Here's what she said. And it grows, and it does its job of shade and looking after us in the summertime. Think about that. It's such a simple idea, but people who can use an oak for shade. If you've ever noticed the huge big oaks we have in Oakland County, shade was important. Think about though, have you ever seen a big oak tree that a farmer left when he cleared his field and he left an oak? He left it for his cows to have shade under. And how many of us have sat under a great big oak tree? So that beautiful idea of a human connection with shade. But it has an even more interesting one. I got to go back to road building in the townships. Yes, there's a connection between roads and oak trees. Early on, the maintenance and building of roads was left in Michigan to the townships, not to the state. And in order to build roads and maintain them, townships charged a road tax. In many cases, farmers were unable to pay a road tax. So they created what they called the statute labor system, which meant farmers, if you couldn't pay your tax, could work off their tax up to 30 days a year. They would help maintain and build roads. And then they created a way to lower your tax because sometimes farmers said, I don't know if I have enough time to work enough days. So they said, okay, here's a way to lower your road tax so you don't have to pay as much or work so many days. For one thing, you could provide equipment, a wagon, a yoke of oxen, some horses, or other equipment. If you provide some road building equipment, we'll lower your taxes. And we'll also lower your taxes if you plant shade trees on your property along a road. How cool is that? Obviously, people along roadways wanted to begin to build shade trees. I'll bet you've been in Oakland County, particularly in the north. This is a road I live on, Hummer Lake Road. And you'll find these beautiful old oaks along and planted in a line around roadways. Those were planted long ago to help pay off a part of your road tax. Now, wait a minute, though. We're talking almost 200 years ago when we're thinking early Oakland County history when the townships were doing roads. Can an oak tree live 200 years? Oh, yeah, 300 years. The oak trees can easily live 300 years if nobody messes with it. So we have oak trees here that actually were planted when Oakland County was first created. What about our oldest oak? Well, you're looking at it, the oldest one that's been recognized. This is the beautiful Shuet oak in Oakland Township. It's estimated to be 500 years old. What an oak tree. Now, here's what I think about. Think about the people who have touched or admired that oak tree. We're talking about Anishinaabe people who long ago knew that oak tree down through time. What an example of the connection between a natural feature and people. Here's another use of trees, human use, right up here. Well, they're not real big trees. Oh, they're planted in nice straight rows. What are we looking at? We're looking at an apple orchard. And Oakland County was very big in terms of apples and apple orchards. Where's that orchard today? Well, you're at Lion Oaks County Park. And at one time, that's where the orchard was. It's now different kinds of trees, but we have recently located a few apple trees still within that original orchard. Well, now, were we that big in apples? Yes, 1872. Oakland County produced over 500,000, 500,000 bushels of apples. That was more than any other county in the state in the 1870s. And what was it about apples? Well, you could eat them fresh, fried, stewed, or baked. Oh, we're just getting a message here. We could be in trouble here. Um, we might have to figure out. We got a 10-minute warning, but I'm going to keep plowing away here. Think about the different ways. You could make cider vinegar or apple brandy. You could dry them easily in the sun or a dry house. They could be made into preserves or apple butter. And you could feed them just like the acorns and the pigs. You could feed them to your livestock if you had a crop one year that wasn't a very healthy crop. And so we've been out looking for the apple orchards of our Oakland County parks. You saw the Lion Oaks. Here's the one at Independence Oaks on the old Bellett's homestead. Here's Addison Oaks, 1, 2, 3 old orchards. Here's Rose Oaks. This one we're thinking is our oldest orchard, and why? A lot of the trees are gone by now, even gone by 1940. We only are located about 3 or 4 trees left from there, but I want to tell you in a minute what we're going to do with some of those trees. Now, here's somebody else who's out looking for their apple trees, the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore people. And why? Because there are some beautiful old apple trees within that park. Apple, like in Oakland County, was big in that area. And now, why is it important? Quote, preserving these old heritage apples is key to preserving the park's and the region's history, in the same way an old farmhouse or barn might be. Have you ever thought about how preserving an old apple tree is similar to saving an old barn? Think about that for a minute. But how do you preserve an apple tree? Well, you take an old apple tree and you graft a piece of it onto a new growing tree. And now you'll see the old tree and the new baby tree, and you create an orchard by grafting. There's 2 or 3 ways to graft. Here's one. Here's another. You can see this one. Here's another. We've been grafting fruit trees on the planet for a very long time. So what we're planning to do is find our oldest trees, and we're going to graft them. Sean Zara, my colleague who's a naturalist, has been out checking for these old trees. We are going to grow a new Oakland County orchard using what we think are some of our oldest apple trees. But that got me thinking, what was Oakland County's oldest orchard? Who had the first orchard? Well, it turned out to be a fascinating piece of history that I'm still working on, by the way. It appears that the oldest orchard to have been planted in Oakland County was here in West Bloomfield Township on Apple Island in the middle of Orchard Lake. Because here's what we've been learning. Oliver Williams, who had a farm along the Saginaw Trail, now Dixie Highway, out on the shores of Silver Lake, according to his family history, which related by his son, Oliver and his son Ephraim and Dr. William Thompson got in a canoe and using 1820, going through lakes and the Clinton River, made their way to Orchard Lake, and they arrived at the lake, camped on the island. They think they were the first white men to visit the island and the Native Americans who were residing there. And they next took a quantity of fine apple trees from that old, quote, Indian orchard, and they went back down the Clinton home to Silver Lake. Now think about that. That orchard was there in 1820, and it was old enough that it had been there a while. That orchard was an indigenous orchard. I had not thought about indigenous orchards until I was working on this piece of history. And what did Oliver Williams do? Well, he planted an orchard. And then other farmers in the area came and got apple trees from his orchard to start, or grafted, because grafting goes back a long time. So think about the fact that we have an indigenous orchard in West Bloomfield. Oliver Williams takes and builds an orchard. Other people get from him. And suddenly this orchard is spread across Oakland County. So where was the oldest orchard? Right there on Apple Island. And then trails. People make trails, all right? Our parks are filled with trails. We have 100 miles of trails in our Oakland County Park system. And when I first went to work for parks, I said to Dan Stencil, "Oh, how do we know where to put a trail?" And he said, "It's simple. We use a trail that's already there." Oh, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I thought about this trail. It's on John Essler's farm. John Essler, 1860 farm. This is his son, John Essler Jr. And so I went and looked at here's Rose Oaks. Here's his farm. Well, then I went and looked. Oh, by the way, he's a neighbor of the Lilac Bush Fillingham. And then I noticed here was his farm, and here was that trail I had loved. And here was the trail. But then watch, I went to an aerial photo from 1963 and look, the trail, there's his house, his farm, and look at, you can see the trail there. The trail we use now was created by John Essler. Here's the trail again. I think it's wonderful because now you think that trail John Essler, but that got me thinking, how did John Essler decide where to put his trail? Wait a minute, I said. What have I been studying? I've been studying Native American trails, bunches of them. And I read a historian that said there was a trail that went to every lake in Oakland County. So what if John Essler already had a trail there? And that's where he put his trail, and that trail was a Native American trail. Think how that enriches your experience when you're walking down a trail in one of our parks. But then place names. That trail, what do we call that trail? Thank goodness we call it the Essler Loop. We've named it for John Essler's farm, which got me thinking. Here's his farm, and there's Essler Lake. But wait a minute, Rose Oaks has Richardson Lake. Guess whose farm that was? The Richardson family. Over here, Mallet Lake. You guessed it, there was the Mallet farm. So the way we name things. Oh, here, Addison Oaks County Park, and you're looking at Buell Lake. Yep, named for the Buell family. And let me end with fence posts and foundations. I showed you these, but who did they belong to? Peter and Sarah Shoemaker. These are the last remnants of their farm. These buildings are all gone. The barns, the houses, but two fence posts are left. So that family had that farm up until 1920. Let me take you to Independence Oaks. We have twin chimneys. Look at these beautiful fireplaces. In this structure, our pavilion, there's two of them. Two big fireplaces. We didn't build them. Oh no. This history goes back in time to this building, a beautiful log summer house. That log house was built in the 1940s.
Meeting is being recorded.
When Palmer Bee Company, they were making conveyor belts. R.A. Palmer and George Bee, making conveyor belts in Detroit, and decided they wanted to do farming. And so they bought some land in Independence Township and they started raising Hereford cattle. And George B. liked the place so much, he built this big, beautiful log structure. And then eventually we would buy the land and we would inherit that beautiful log structure with its two big fireplaces. But 3 months after Oakland County got the land, it burned to the ground by vandals. But we said, we can save that history. We'll save that slate 4 and those fireplaces, and we created Twin Chimneys Pavilion. Well, wait a minute. Here's a nice foundation. Whose was it? Wait a minute. Here it is. Wait, you know this lilac bush, Mr. Fillingham's lilac bush, and wait a minute. That's the foundation of his farm. So now, oh, sorry, of his little barn. So now the history puzzle pieces begin to come together. Another pile of rocks, but this isn't in a field. This is a foundation. This is cool because it's a mortarless foundation. From everything we viewed about it, it took some real skill to build a foundation of rock without mortar. Careful selection of rock. This is the Bellett's homestead, the Bellett's farmhouse, this beautiful old foundation. If you look here, the Bellett's homestead, Independence Oaks, located right in that direction. Here was their homestead, 1860 farm, Prussian family. Here's Rachel and her children. Children grew up on that homestead. Henry Belletts had died at the time this photo was taken. But when you can attach a pile of rocks to people, when you think about those kids grew up in that house, that now all I have is a pile of rocks as a remnant of it. So it's an amazing, amazing foundation. It's off the Spring Lake Trail. We're being very careful of it because of its condition. We're hoping to do some more surveying of the foundation, hoping eventually to do some test pits for archaeology near there. And then wait a minute, you already had a little clue to the Bellett's puzzle. Remember their orchard there? And that's when history becomes fascinating in a park. When you have an apple orchard, and then you have a foundation, and then you have a photo of a family. When history begins to come together as this puzzle now. Missing pieces, of course. So evidence of human history. Well, sometimes it can connect to natural things, plants and trees, lilacs and serviceberry. And then the way we name things, trails and place names. And then fence posts and foundations. And the artifacts that are left behind. And so that's what my job is, trying to document. And first of all, we document it, we research it, we document it, and then we share it, and then we celebrate it, trying to enrich the experiences people have. Well, now, before we do questions, let me tell you next time. Some years ago, I've been working on Civil War soldiers in Oakland County with Rich Stamps and Bruce Hawkins in particular. And what I've done is find some stories of Civil War soldiers who lived at one time on parkland. And I think you're going to find some fascinating stories. In November, I'll come back and do one on Indigenous history. I'm going to do wild rice. I'm also going to do some more on river systems. I'm going to do more on apple orchards at that time. Then we'll take December off. We'll come back in January. And right now, I am working on a topic list for January through April. So if you have something you'd like me to research and do as a presentation in 2026, send me an email. Something you're interested in Oakland County. I guarantee you we'll find a park connection to it. But if there's something you have an interest in and would like to know more and you think it would make a good fireside chat topic, well, just send me an email. And finally, we still have some seats available for our bus tour in search of Oakland County history. You have two possible dates, October 15th or 18th. It's sponsored by Oakland History Center and Oakland County Parks. I will be your tour guide. We'll be starting at the History Center, where I'll do a little presentation on what we're going to see that day. And then we're going to visit the Wisner Mansion. and learn about that. We're going to get on a bus and go out to Waterford's historic village, have a box lunch there, and then have the great joy of visiting their historic buildings there, and then get on a bus and go out to my little village of Ortonville, where you'll have an opportunity to see an amazing old mill and museum, a one-room schoolhouse, and our blacksmith shop. And I have talked our local blacksmith into coming that day and demonstrating for you. So it's going to be a fun bus trip. It's an all-day adventure. You will get a triptych like AAA used to do, a goodie sack, a bottle of water, and we'll have a great amount of fun together. Now I'm going to stop sharing and take time if people have questions or comments. Oh, they're so quiet. Don't be shy. How about you, Rich Stamps?
Well, I'm trying to join in, and I would say very interesting presentation. And it's fun to see the connections between the natural world and the historical record. Uh, and I think you've also emphasized the value of leaving some ruins around. If you've got a stone wall or if you've got a foundation, go ahead and leave it. Or I think with sadness, we've had so many nice old schools built in the 20s and 30s, and then by the 70s, 80s, or 90s, well, it's not big, it's not modern, so we just tear it down. Wouldn't it be nice if they just saved a corner with the date on it and just built it into either build it into the new building or build just a little monument where the old school was? Because now kids who graduated from those schools, they go back to the school, it's not there. They go back to different landscape, different buildings, and it's not as easy for them to relate. Wouldn't it be nice if we had left behind just a couple of cornerstones, a couple of dates, and they could walk up and touch it and feel it and say to their kids and grandkids, yes, here's where my school was. So I think it is valuable to leave some ruins around. And another piece is just the importance of signage. That if we can put labels on trees, or if we can put labels where you have the information coming from the census and the maps, just little signs, and that's nice also. Especially in the parks, if you've got the trails and people are walking the trails, go ahead and put a few signs out there, and that can enhance the experience of the visitors going to visit the parks.
You
So,
know, and that's a great point because we are redoing all our signs in our park system to make them more friendly, more visuals. And for the first time, we'll be doing history signs because, you know, it's one thing for me to tell you that that's the Fillingham farm, that's his lilac bush, but other people don't know that when they're there walking in that park, that's also our equestrian entrance. Coming in with a horse trailer and looking around, they won't know whose lilac bush that was. And so, and that doesn't take a real long sign. The first sign we've designed is the shoemaker homestead, because we can put the photo of their house on there. We have that. So that's really important. And for you to advocate in your own communities for signage. We're beginning in Ortonville to work on our first sign about where the old mill pond was. You know, we need to be at this time, we need to be advocates for history. We need to keep reminding people, those in Washington in particular, that history is important. We want to hold on to history. History is important, archaeology is important, and that idea of saving a little piece of something. And we need to advocate that in our communities. You know, we're losing Roosevelt School. I know Gina's with us tonight, and the heartbreak of losing that school. And so, what can we push force of what are you going to save behind for that? It looks like that battle sadly is lost, although it's got a little momentum with this asbestos issue. But then Rich's idea, what can we save? How can we create that? It becomes a challenge for all of us to advocate now for history. Anything else? Well, it was good to spend time with you all tonight. Sorry for the technical thing. Anna and I are not responsible for paying the Zoom bill just for Zoom bill, but we will find the appropriate people.
Yes,
Um,
we will.
and track them down. And we will see you hopefully in October for our Civil War one. And I will cover Civil War Widow because I think those are fascinating stories too. So you have a good September. October is almost here. And enjoy the beauty of October. Visit one of our parks in October and see how magical they are. All right, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.